Coming up, this week gave us a timely reminder of the extent of Boris Johnson's lies during his time as Prime Minister, and also his determination to never put his hand in his own pocket, but to always get other people to pay for his stuff, whether it be gold leaf wallpaper, or drunken bunga parties in Italy with KGB agents, or getting the taxpayer to fund his personal legal team during the partygate inquiry. This cheapskate behaviour backfired spectacularly on him this week, as his partygate defence team were paid not by him but by public funds through the Cabinet Office. That meant that the Cabinet Office received copies of all his defence papers. And those papers included a copy of his personal pandemic diaries, which detailed around a dozen previously undisclosed, apparently rule-breaking events during lockdown at both Chequers and at Number 10. Under the Civil Service Code, Cabinet Office officials had no choice but to turn these diaries over to the police, which looked like triggering further charges against the lying, rule-breaking, miserly ex-Prime Minister. But in this video, I will argue that Rishi Sunak is, if anything, even more dishonest than Johnson. Stay tuned. I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button, subscribe, and above all, share a link to this video with your social media contacts.
This government will have integrity, professionalism, and accountability at every level.
Of course, within hours of that speech, Sunak had reappointed the disgraced former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, to her old post, Home Secretary, one of the 4 great offices of state. The one she'd been sacked from just days earlier by sharing top-secret intelligence documents with unauthorised recipients and putting national security at risk. Sunak, of course, lied about the reasons for this appointment, which was quite obviously made to win the support of the Tory right-wing nutjobs in order to avoid another leadership election being put to the Tory party membership. Bear in mind that Sunak is the man who lost to the inadequate Liz Truss, who in turn lost to a lettuce. Braverman, as the returning Home Secretary, was the result of Sunak's deal with the devil. And after that inauspicious start, Sunak has continued his premiership in the mould of Boris Johnson. In his first Prime Minister's questions last October, Sunak's dishonesty was already evident. He told Labour's Richard Burgon,
Mr. Speaker, we will always support our hard-working nurses, and that's why, as Chancellor, we reintroduced the nurses' bursary and provided more training.
This was, of course, a blatant lie, which Sunak would have been fully aware of. Sunak had offered a new educational grant of £5,000 a year for all new nursing students from September 2020, but that figure was significantly less money than the old bursary system, which was scrapped by the Tory government, leaving student nurses far worse off. But worse was to come. In that very same PMQs, Sunak stated that
we must protect our green belt, and we are adopting a brownfield-first strategy. I'm pleased we had a record number of new homes built in the last year.
This claim again was a total lie. The due diligence website Full Fact later commented that the most recent published data shows 173,520 new homes were completed in England in the year to June 2022, slightly down on the previous year. Okay, you might think, Sunak was mistaken. You can't call him a liar if he made that statement in good faith. And in any case, perhaps it's not that important that he got the numbers wrong. But here's the thing. Boris Johnson made a habit of regularly throwing out these random false claims in Parliament, leaving them on the Hansard record, even after they'd been exposed as false. Both Parliamentary Convention and the Ministerial Code demand that when a claim is made in Parliament that is later shown to be false, the record should be corrected at the earliest possible opportunity. If Sunak had indeed done that, as required by the Code and by Convention, he could have sent a powerful signal that politics was back to normal, that no longer would the Tories stick with their alternative facts, divorced from reality. But by choosing not to correct his lies, he confirmed in his very first week as Prime Minister that he shared Johnson's contempt for integrity and truth.
This government will have integrity, professionalism, and accountability at every level.
The following month, on 30th of November 2022, Sunak told another whopper in the House of Commons.
Just remember one thing, Mr. Speaker. We had the fastest vaccine rollout in the world. We had that because of our freedoms after leaving the European Union.
As even Larry the cat knows by now, in fact, the UK's vaccines were procured while still a member of the single market and the European Medicines Agency, the EMA. The UK's early vaccine rollout was done under Regulation 174, an EU provision allowing member states to bypass the authorisation of the EMA and to issue their own medicines. So Brexit had absolutely sod all to do with the vaccine rollout, as Sunak bloody well knows.
This government will have integrity, professionalism, and accountability at every level.
I've been following politics since the day I joined the Anti-Nazi League as a teenager back in the 1970s, and I'm not naive. Every Prime Minister, both Labour and Tory, tells lies on occasion. But up until Boris Johnson, none of them seem to be serial liars, habitual liars. I'd even include David Cameron and Theresa May in that statement, much as I disagreed with their politics. But Johnson seemed to be a one-off. Dim Lizzie had been and gone before we could make a judgment on her honesty. Her stupidity prevented that. But when Sunak took over, most of us thought that the adults were back in the room, that the shameless lying of the Johnson years was now over. But that has proven to be very far from being the case. Even his 5 pledges are based in dishonesty. For example, his promise to reduce debt is a complete lie. The March budget statement shows that Sunak and his Chancellor Jezza Hunt mean to increase debt by a massive amount, while at the same time telling voters the complete opposite. For all Tory party chair Greg Hand's daily tweets about the note left by Labour about there being no money left, debt under the Tories has more than tripled since Labour left office. Labour left a national debt of £811 billion after bailing out the banks following the global economic crisis in 2018. You remember the USA subprime mortgage bubble that the Labour government had no control over whatsoever. History has indeed shown that Gordon Brown was the man who saved the British economy during that crisis. But it did mean the national debt reached a record £811 billion. But after 13 years of Tory rule, and according to the Office for Budget Responsibility, net national debt is now above £2.5 trillion at the time of the March budget, more than triple the debt under Labour. And that almighty figure is projected to rise every year till 2028. That's another 5 years of rises in national debt to come based on Sunak's current plans. By the time 2028 comes round, the national debt will have grown to £2.9 trillion. Sunak is the ex-Chancellor of the Exchequer. He can't pretend not to understand these numbers, and that his promise to reduce debt is just another Sunak lie. This week saw the latest scandal surrounding the incompetent and dishonest Home Secretary, the exceedingly unpleasant right-wing nutjob Suella Braverman, still currently in post as the worst Home Secretary of all time. Despite holding one of the 4 great offices of state, she continually lies, and you have to assume that she takes her lead from her boss, Sunak. Sunak's willingness to lie on important issues appears to be sending a message to his cabinet ministers that they are allowed to follow suit. And Braverman is the biggest culprit, with echoes of Orwell's 1984 and her statement denying that Brexit is to blame for Dover delays. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. Braverman has also lied about Pakistani males being disproportionately responsible for grooming gangs, a claim that has been proved false by her own officials, who have confirmed that grooming gangs are predominantly white British, making this Home Secretary of Indian heredity a racist as well as a liar. This week's controversy over her speeding fine was the latest example of Sunak frequently breaking his promise to bring integrity back to government, as she's been let off scot-free for her latest breach of the ministerial code without even an inquiry by Sunak's ethics advisor.
This government will have integrity, professionalism, and accountability at every level.
And it's not just Braverman. During International Trade Week last November, Michael Gove tweeted this: "We've secured new free trade deals with over 70 countries since 2016. That's over £800 billion worth of new global trade." This is, of course, a complete lie. Robert Choate, chair of the UK Statistics Authority, has since stated that it is misleading to describe the £800 billion figure as a measure of new global trade resulting from the recent deals. Many of the deals signed since leaving the EU were simple cut and paste of deals that we had while a member of the EU, sometimes on worse terms. Others, like the Japan deal, replicated deals with countries that the EU have also added trade deals with. And on the Japan deal in particular, the EU won significantly better terms than the UK did.
This government will have integrity, professionalism, and accountability at every level.
And the Health Secretary, Stephen Barclay, is yet another minister who has taken the lead from his boss, Sunak, when it comes to lying. Although he's not the only senior minister to have told the big porky that accepting public sector pay demands would cost £1,000 for every household in the UK. This was just replicating the lie told by his leader, who had led the way on this particular lie in front of an RAF base in Lincolnshire.
The government is always going to try and act fairly and reasonably, and that's why we accepted in full the recommendations of the independent bodies that advise a government on the appropriate levels of pay in the public sector.
Independent? No, they're not. The government sets the parameters of these reviews and the limits of what these pay review bodies can award. But back to the Boris Johnson Tribute Act.
What I'm not going to do is ask ordinary families up and down the country to pay an extra £1,000 a year to meet the pay demands of the union bosses. That wouldn't be right and it wouldn't be fair.
The demands of the union bosses. So misleading. Unions represent their workers, and these pay demands were voted on by a huge majority of union members, exceeding the stringent thresholds for industrial action set by anti-workers' rights Tory administrations. And in any case, that £1,000 figure is complete bollocks, as pointed out by the UK Statistics Authority, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, and the fact-checking organisation Full Fact. Just like his predecessor, it's as if Sunak and his ministers taking their lead from him don't respect facts at all. On the environment, Sunak has insisted that Britain is committed to net zero. Yet, as Prime Minister, he has ejected the COP26 President, Alok Sharma, and the Climate Minister, Graham Stewart, from the Cabinet. He only decided to attend COP27 himself after being pressurised to do so, and making that decision at the very last minute. And he advised King Charles against attending himself. Sunak is pressing ahead with the opening of a new coal mine in Cumbria, making Britain the laughingstock of other countries genuinely committed to net zero. And then there's the increasingly out-of-touch and irrelevant serial statements that Sunak makes about Jeremy Corbyn. He stated during PMQs in December last year that Corbyn's national security agenda involved
abolishing our armed forces, scrapping the nuclear deterrent, withdrawing from NATO, voting against every single anti-terror law we tried, befriending Hamas and Hezbollah.
Labour's 2019 election manifesto proposed none of these things, and Sunak has not corrected these false statements despite being specifically asked to do so in Parliament by Jeremy Corbyn himself. Sunak's promise:
this government will have integrity, professionalism, and accountability at every level,
has proved to be completely insincere and, I would say, cynically dishonest. He's just a Boris Johnson Tribute Act, a continuation of the most dishonest period in British politics since time immemorial. Boris Johnson and continuity Boris Johnson Rishi Sunak have proven to be equally dishonest. and I cannot wait to see their far-right, corrupt, dishonest government come to an end.